You're listening to the podcast Women Ending War. I'm your co-host, Elana Sztokman, a Jewish Israeli-American, along with my co-hosts Eva Dalak and Dr. Fakhira Halloun, Palestinian citizens of Israel. Together, we are activating peace. Welcome.
Shalom Aleichem, Elana.
Assalamu alaikum, Eva. Habibti.
Habibti.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Good to be back.
Yeah.
Especially to close season 2.
Yeah. It's been quite a ride.
A wild ride indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of lessons, a lot of things we're learning, things that I didn't necessarily understand, learning so much from all of our conversations, all of our discussions, sometimes hard lessons.
Yeah, yeah.
What about you?
Good. It was interesting to be here. I mean, like 4 months ago we started recording season 2 and I was in town. Then I had a whole trip out of town and now I'm back here. And it seems like the time span is so fast and events are incredibly rushed, I feel, amongst some major lessons learned, but also a lot of, I want to say, best practices to reframe and challenges that we had to deal with, including presence, non-presence, uploading, protecting, not protecting, you know, like lots of major learning curve.
Learning curve.
Say. Yes.
Learning curve.
That's a good reframe, learning curve.
Yeah. We had one particularly challenging event that we didn't share.
Yes.
Which is that we recorded episode 9. That was we recorded an interview with a Palestinian woman from Gaza.
And I wasn't present.
And you weren't present?
I couldn't be present.
It was your friend, but I was doing the interview long distance.
Yeah.
And
we had a preparation call beforehand.
Yeah.
And kind of, we
had two preparation calls and we agreed on questions. And then I inserted a question that wasn't planned, where I asked her about the hostages. I said, what do people in Gaza think? First of all, before we talk about the hostages, I just want to say her interview was so important. For me, she really shared so many important perspectives about life in Gaza. She talked about her family's homelessness, how they had to move homes 4 times. She talked about her family home. It was a 4-generation home in Gaza City that was totally destroyed with everything that was in it and what that meant. She talked about all the people she knew who died. She didn't even talk about all of them. She said there were too many even to sort of list. She talked about people who were killed from her childhood, from her university days, and how there were so many deaths that they couldn't even mourn them all. And she said there were people whose bodies were still in rubble. There was so much death, she said, that they didn't even have the luxury or privilege of mourning. And so all of those things were so. She talked about food, the absence of food. She talked about how her family, who were living in someone's backyard, felt lucky because they had canned food, so they were fed. You know, she gave a really important perspective, a
physical, visceral perspective, I think.
Yeah.
A perspective that was grounded in real life experience. And I think it was really, for me, it really highlighted how resilient people in Gaza are, Palestinian in general, but also specifically people in Gaza, and how each one is feeling the privilege that they have because they have just a little bit more than the other, just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that show, I think the human capacity in general to appreciate life and to appreciate when everything else is taken, to still find the small things in life that matter and hold on to them. And I think that's super strong. Like when I listened to it, I was like, wow, so impressive.
You have a lot of family in Gaza also.
Yeah.
Your mother's whole family is there almost.
My mom's family is in Gaza. Many of them lost their life, lost their home, lost all their belonging. I was speaking with them this afternoon as well. Just because of the ceasefire, there's many going back home to nothing. To nothing. And so within the family, we're like trying to discuss how can we support them best in the reconstruction of their family's home.
So this is like an unbearable level of survival mode. So like in this interview, you know, I wanted to share this portrait also. I want to be a vehicle for the world to understand the truth about what people in Gaza are going through. You know, that was sort of the goal. And she did it, you know, she shared even though it was so raw. You know, she also shared things from before. She herself doesn't live in Gaza for the last 6 years, so she talked about how she spent 6 years not being able to see her family. And she herself is a peace activist. She's a poet and a musician and an artist, and she's in a peace activation. She's a peace activator. So I was asking her, you know, all these questions and trying to get her to share. And in the middle of the interview, I inserted this question. I said, "And what do people in Gaza think about the hostages?" And she really didn't really it wasn't a question that we agreed on, and it really had nothing to do with what the story was that we were going to tell. But, you know, in the end, she really felt like I was trapping her, that I was like giving her the sort of like the whataboutism, like, well, what about kind of, she thought that I was giving, even though I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean to be like, well, what are you then? And I know that posture, and I know how toxic that posture is. I am fully aware of how the whataboutism is a toxic posture, and I so deeply regret that I did that in that second. It was like I was, as I said to you, like I felt like I always have all of these anti-voices in my head, you know, because like when I share all of these materials and when I share my opinions and all of that, I always get I get so much pushback all the time from my own people, from family members, from people I went to school with, you know, people I went to school with are the worst actually, you know, and so I constantly have that anti-voice in my head. And so for that like split second of this interview, I had this thought, well, what are all those people going to be saying when I air this? And so I felt like, oh, I should, you know, put that question in just so it gives it some kind of like, I don't know, legitimacy. It was so wrong, and I regret it. Anyway, so because of that, she really felt very bad. As an independent podcast, we rely on the support of our fans, like you, to keep us going. If you like this and want more, please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, Facebook, Insta. Please comment and share, because that helps us get our vital message out. And please consider becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack or donating to our GoFundMe page. That helps ensure that we can continue our important work of activating peace. Thank you, Toda, and Shukran. Anyway, so that's why we didn't air the episode, because she didn't want us to air it, because she felt cornered and attacked, and I so deeply regret that on so many levels. I regret my own lack of self-awareness, and I deeply regret that because of that, we're not able to air what was otherwise a really important discussion. So, what do you think about that?
For me, it was interesting to. Well, first of all, I really regretted not being there. And somehow I think I felt it was going to be safe for you to do the interview alone, because there was the preparation talk, and I know this person as part of my team member, and so I didn't feel that there was a need for me to be there. Do you now not trust me? It's not a question of trust, but I'm just saying that we cannot be blind and 100% trusting, actually, that we can be taken aback by when not being present in the discussion and trying to figure out how do people that are listening to us, what would they think of what we're talking about. And I think that perspective just takes me out of my present moment of discussion with you and gets me into a place where I'm not anymore authentic and not anymore expressing what I want to express, but rather thinking about what would people say, so I better ask the question that they would want me to ask. And I don't want to go there. I want to be here now, and I want to speak from that place. And so for me, there was a couple of things. There's obviously the power dynamic that was there, and also trauma. I mean, there's different type of level, I would say, of trauma. Your own trauma, but also her own. And so there was, in a place where there was a potential for opening and expansion, what happened was contraction. And I think it's a great example. And I think it's great that we're able also to discuss it as the closing of this season and saying, yeah, we had an episode that we decided not to air because we're respecting the decision of that person and because we weren't fair. I wasn't fair, and I'm taking responsibility because I wasn't present. And you weren't fair because you inserted a question that you didn't agree on. And I think that brings our conversation to a whole new level of accountability and responsibility. And I think that's what I want to project in the listener that are here listening to us and following us. And also to say, yeah, when we're doing things not according to plan, well, there's a price to pay. And there's always a price to pay.
Right.
And I think it's important that we pay the price. And the price is that a very good episode wasn't aired. And
that learning. You trust me a little less. That's also a price.
It's not that I trust you a little less. It's just telling us, and to you too, not to be blindly trusting, even in your own self, because somehow you inserted a question that you didn't even know you were going to ask.
Right.
And so this means that your subconscious were playing.
Well, so that was a good life lesson for me also in that sense. I mean, it's terrible that it was on her back, you know, but what you were describing here about that level of self-awareness, I think there were a lot of issues of self-awareness that I learned from this, right?
Yes.
So I think one was the power issue, right? So in other words, I've been interviewed many times. Like I've been in many situations I've been interviewed, and there are times when people ask questions that we don't like, that make us uncomfortable, all kinds of things. But here, there were elements of, and you sort of have to roll with it. You know, as an interviewee, if you want to go through the process, you sort of learn to roll with that. But here, there were those two elements that you mentioned about, one was about the power dynamic and the other about trauma that particularly characterized our interactions here and our exchanges that I was not sufficiently aware, I wasn't sufficiently conscious of. So, you know, so the issue of power, you know, at the end of the day, I am the Israeli here. You know, I am the Israeli here, and it takes a lot for a Palestinian to sit with me and trust me. Yeah, it takes a lot because I have power. You know, I have power of movement. I can speak without being afraid. I'm not afraid of losing my house. I'm not afraid of being arrested. I'm not afraid of any of those things. I'm not being afraid of, you know, soldiers invading my house in the middle of the night. I mean, I'm afraid of other things, okay? But in terms of the power dynamic, you know, I come from the place. And so...
Of privilege.
Privilege, yeah. So that's really important. That's a really important lesson. And the other thing that you talk about trauma and just understanding how much trauma, how much trauma we're dealing with, you know, in these conversations. On all sides.
On all sides, and not just like her trauma, but also your trauma. And I think this question about the hostages and how do people in Gaza feel about the hostages is really a tricky question. People purposefully, whether it's in international media, Israeli media, or any other media, is like people want to divert the attention of what's going on, the horror that are going on in Gaza by like diverting the conversation like, oh, what about the hostages?
Right.
As if we need to compete on the suffering and comparing and saying, oh, you're talking about what Israel is doing, what about the hostages and what Hamas is doing? And the Gaza kind of like bringing the question of the hostages to Gazan people, it's like, well, you're paying the price of what your people did to our people. And here, there's the hostages, and there's the hostages. But we don't talk about the hostages that the Israeli have taken from the Palestinian homes, because they claim them as prisoner, as terrorists. They frame them in different words, and exactly the same as the IDF being the Israeli Defense Army versus the terrorists that are fighting for their freedom. So I think words are very, very important. The use of words and the legitimacy that Israel carry with the words that they're using around state militarism, as state terrorism, versus a terrorism that is not within the container of the state or within legitimation. And so I think that being aware of this context, of this power dynamic, being aware of the traumas that we all carry, with no exception, and also being aware of the power of the word, the verb. That's how the word, even the world is created. And so I think that for me, that's the nuggets that we've learned here of the gift of the challenge is the self-awareness. That even as aware as we are, and as trusting as we are, and as protective as we are, we can still be taken aback by some energy that we're not aware of, and that takes over. And it takes over when we're not present. And so it brings back into context the necessity of us being present, fully present, and authentic in the present.
Yeah.
And I think that's, for me, that's really the key. It's really the presence. The present is the presence.
I love that, actually. I love the way you're describing that. It feels like a really important lesson. Also, I have another lesson also in my head, by the way, which is, I just came out with this book, right? I just wrote a book about this. One of my biggest topics that I've been writing about for the last 8 or 9 years is about toxic language. It's about language and violence. And so I write about toxic tactics. For a long time, I had this website called Toxic Tactics, in which I listed the many nuances we have in language that seem sort of like normal, but they're sort of expressions of like violence. And what I used was one of them, right? The whataboutism. What you described also is that, that like, well, if someone's trying to share their pain with you, and you respond with, well, what about this? It's a form of like deflection and diversion.
It's a defense mechanism, because you're put on the spot and you don't know how to answer. And so rather than acknowledging and being present with what's being present, you want to divert the attention and then bring in a different element so that we're not paying attention to what is currently present.
Exactly.
Here.
So what my lesson, though, a really painful lesson for me, I want to say, is that with all my research on this and all that I've been writing since basically 26, it's still in my head.
Of course.
It's still in my head. I'm still there. I'm still, the Orthodox girl from Brooklyn. No matter how much I've tried to unlearn difficult, toxic, abusive practices of language. And I've spent so much of my adult life trying to unpack this and be aware of myself. And in a split second, I can have like this lack of self-awareness and fall back into practices that I know are wrong. And I experienced now just how damaging it was. It was such like a nuanced thing that caused so much pain. And I'm like sad. I'm sad about myself a little bit. I don't mean to be like self-flagellated. I'm just saying that I'm sad that I'm still learning the same lessons.
That's the human journey.
I know that it's a spiral, right? You always come back. It's a spiral. I understand that. It's just like non-stop life lessons.
Yes. And I think the beauty of it is that we're able to stand up faster. That's the only difference. It's not that we don't do the same mistakes. And the song about, I don't remember the name of it, but like I walk down the street, there's a hole and I fall into the hole. I stand up, come out of the hole and walk. Second chapter, I walk down the street, the same street, I fall in the same hole, stand up, walk out. This time, I knew there was a hole. I walk down the street, third time. I see the hole. I fall down again and stand up. But this time, I'm walking out faster. Fourth chapter. I walk down the same street, see the hole, remember that I fell, turn around the hole, and continue walking. So this time, I didn't fall. Fifth chapter, I walk down another street. I did not know that. But that's life's journey. So in the next episode or in the next season, hopefully we won't fall in the same hole.
Yes.
And
inshallah.
Yeah.
Amen. Okay.
On to the next. I think we can close that.
Yes. And the next season. So we just started the ceasefire, and so our next season is going to be dedicated to the context of the ceasefire.
Yes.
Hopes, pitfalls, holes that we're falling in or not, walking down different roads. That'll be season 3.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva.
Elana.
It's so great working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the journey together.
Yeah. Beautiful journey. Thank you.
You always teach me we start with peace inside, and from peace inside we can make peace on the outside.
Yeah. That's the peace activation.
Thank you. You've been listening to the podcast Women Ending War
I'm Dr. Elana Sztokman, and my co-host is Eva Dalak. If you like this, please subscribe, share, like, and comment. Links to our channels on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple are below. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Substack. And please consider supporting us financially. We need your help. Link to our GoFundMe page is below. In peace, salam, and shalom.